wanted to talk about today was this whole idea of the impossibility of awakening. It initially started from a conversation I had over lunch at a retreat, and what I've found is a lot of people are looking for this thing called awakening, but if they're really honest about it, they don't think they're going to wake up. So what you find is every year the halls of seekers grow, meetings get busier, and over time what you find is the knowledge level is fantastic. So you get people turning up and they know everything, pretty much about everything. So they have read about Ramana Maharishi, they have probably read I Am That forward, backwards, and every other way. Rumi's Masnavi is probably something that's consumed just before breakfast, and they intellectually pretty much know all of this, and yet the goal eludes them. And one of the things I've recently noticed is this belief amongst a lot of people that awakening exists, but it's not something for them. And I've noticed in conversations, both at meetings and privately with people, that there's a lot of people out there who feel that there's something different about teachers and somehow they function in a different way, and for them awakening is a natural way of being, but for the seeker it's a complete impossibility. It's something that happens to others, as I've just said, but not to them. So I regularly kind of get these questions which infer a lot more than they actually ask, and the way I hear the question is somehow because of my ethnicity, my background, that somehow awakening is easier for someone like me. As I've said at many talks, I was born into a working class family in a town in the Midlands in the UK, and the holy men didn't turn up at my birth to announce that I would go on to become a great spiritual being. If anything, my life was pretty ordinary until several events contributed to me trying to find a deeper meaning to my life. So it's all pretty uneventful. I would love to say that I've had this amazing existence, but that I do have an amazing existence now, but life was pretty uneventful. But it doesn't matter how many times I tell that story, I always get that look, or always get those questions which kind of imply that there's some sort of hidden teaching, or that somehow I function differently. And these ideas that somehow enlightened people function differently, or that there's something unique about them, adds to this idea of impossibility, that somehow we are not worthy enough, we are not deserving enough, our practices or our inquiries as to the nature of existence isn't enough. Add to that the general body of knowledge that exists around the whole idea of waking up, and you find it gets nigh on impossible, because when we read the stories of the great sages who travelled and left their homes and travelled across lands to sit at the company of other great sages just to hear one word or a phrase, then the entire mystique of enlightenment has blown this thing up into such a sense of impossibility that hell's freezing over before poor old you sitting in your flat somewhere watching a YouTube video is ever going to wake up. So you feel you're then not worthy. I mean, for example, I recently completed some talks in Eastern Europe, and I found that the attitude of the Eastern European people was very similar to the attitude I see in a lot of seekers in the Indian subcontinent, in that there is such a mystique around this, that most of the times everything they are doing with an intent that's so wrong that it's literally drawing them further and further away from what they truly are. And that is that we are not worthy, we are like sinful creatures. That's my particular favorite, and that somehow we need to find these great masters who may, and this is where I kind of really like it, who may glance at us from their throne and give us some mantra or something like that will wake us up. There's a really great scene in the film Holy Smoke, I think, with Kate Winslet, and she's a young Australian girl who goes to India, and there's a guru there, and he's handing out Shaktipats like the way you would hand out sweets, I suppose. In a confectioner store, I suppose. I've just lost my train of thought there. And you see him approaching her, and he touches her third eye, and she goes into bliss and stuff. So all of this information, the mystique and everything, compounds to this sense of complete impossibility. And it's something that's traveled, so it's in our conditioning, regardless, because we, if we're in the West and we're Christians, we go to church and we get told that we're not worthy and God's going to do this, this and this. And if you're in the East and you go to a mandir or a gurdwara or a masjid, then the same thing is being said to you there as well. And normally it's being said to you by people who have absolutely no idea what they're talking about. They've read it out of a book and they're as lost as you are. They're not experiencing the reality that they wax so lyrical about from their pulpits. But anyway, so what happens is you hear all of this and you start realizing it's impossible, that awakenings happen to these unique individuals, or if they were ordinary individuals, that the awakening has somehow transfigured them to the point that they are now functioning totally differently. And what that does is it creates another separation, it creates another idea for you to grapple with, and it just adds on to the body of knowledge about this and turns something that's very simple and very ordinary into something that's unattainable. I talked about a certain character in my book, Falling into the Mystery, and he's known as, we know him as Sufi Saab. He lives in Glasgow, and what was really interesting is he was a seeker. He was like a real committed seeker, and you'd see this guy being abused, putting up with all sorts from people, all because he was looking for this thing called enlightenment, which in his head would be the cure-all for everything. Yes, let's add spiritual bypassing as well. So he believed that if you could attain this goal, that somehow life would work. So this pressure as well to wake up that we put on ourselves creates this sense of impossibility as well. And it makes it even harder and stuff. And we engage and we do things which are completely contrary to what we actually are. So for example, myself as well, when I initially started seeking, I did things that if I look back on it now, although I'm grateful I went through the experience, I don't think I would have gone through that. And there was a lot of misinformation and there was a lot of misunderstanding, which was cleared up when I decided to meet the person that really mattered, which was myself. But again, although that's a really simple statement, to a mind conditioned with this idea of impossibility, that becomes some deep spiritual practice. And I know that when I record videos, people are looking for a hidden meaning in this. Like when we say it's just this has now become a mantra and something deeply spiritual. It's not. It's 3 words. That's all it is. What most people don't realize is most teachers are talking quite literally. The story I tell a lot of is the one where I was told by my first ever teacher to get a job. And somehow over the space of 3 months, a simple statement like get a job was turned into some great spiritual hidden meaning revelatory statement that just made me look like a clown when I got in front of him again and he asked me if I had gone and got a job. So let's look at this mystique and see if it's actually valid. Let's look at these ideas of somehow enlightened people have a unique set of DNA or were anointed by God at their birth to lead the masses from I don't know, slavery into freedom. And what you find is a lot of these ideas aren't true, but they contribute to this whole idea of, oh, well, waking up is okay for that person over there, but it's not for me. And it's not for me because guess what, I've not done this or I've not done that, and I haven't found a true teacher and my practices have come up short. What I've found in the spiritual world, and it is something that I feel is purer in the West, and we are moving more towards people looking more deeply within themselves, which is why I feel the non-duality community has grown the way it has, is that most of the people, who are talking about this aren't qualified to talk about this. One visit to your local place of worship will pretty much tell you that most of these people are, it's a career for them. They are paid to look and sound and be benevolent. And true spirituality is anything but sitting there sometimes being benevolent, or sitting there and being all love and light. I saw this great post about light workers, and it was, well, if you feel it's all just love or light, you've not really understood it, because true spirituality is casting a light into the darkness, and it is having the uncomfortable conversations. And one of the uncomfortable conversations, if people are really honest with themselves, then they may find that they don't feel that this is going to happen to them. They don't feel that awakening is going to happen to them, and that impossibility, that thought of, it's okay for that person over there but not for me, because the body of knowledge around this has created such an impossibility and such a mystique and such a massive, I'm struggling for words here, created such amount of disinformation that the mind cannot comprehend that its natural way of being is this reality. Because, as I say to people, it's like your stories are going to go, and other things like that. But I find that can sometimes be misheard, and that then further compounds the problem, because we're now wondering, well, am I going to be able to handle this? I remember once, a young man came to a talk and was like, I don't want to wake up because I don't want to, forget my wife and my daughter, and just went on about it constantly, and then has an awakening. And the first thing I asked him was if he remembered his wife and daughter, and he looked at me like I was stupid. But I'm really glad he looked at me like that, because he saw the futility in his thinking, and the idea that this cannot happen to you, the idea that somehow you are not worthy or not deserving of functioning as you truly are because of a story of conditioning by so-called religious figures and peer groups and families, that this is not for us, denies us our very own essence. It denies us our very own divinity, and that's sad. So please look at these ideas. As I've said, I'm from a working class family, from a nondescript town in the Midlands. The Buddha did not turn up at my birth. The Dalai Lama didn't hail my birth. The three wise men definitely didn't show up, and I was born in a maternity ward, screaming and kicking just like every other baby that day. And yet, just by being honest, and this is not because I have some sort of unique DNA or I come from the Indian subcontinent, and that somehow in my house there's a sitar playing in the corner and my family are discussing the Upanishads and the Quran and the Masnavi over dinner. It tends to be, what am I going to watch on Netflix tonight? Because it is a very ordinary way of existing, but that's where the extraordinariness of it is. As I say to most people, and those who know me well, some of my best moments happen going to the local Tesco's to pick up cat food. And the thing I found is that the ideas of spirituality have contributed to a lot of people running away from themselves, myself included. We're looking to find the mountaintop, and we're running to find this mountaintop. And what I found when the whole idea of looking stopped was that there is really just here, and here is enough. And I find that the miracle is always here in the ordinary. And I know how what I'm saying can be taken as a soundbite now, or we can look for a hidden meaning, but trust me, it is really just this moment. And if we can stop turning away from it, and if we can stop believing that it's impossible, there's a certain young lady that I speak to who is very well-meaning and very sincere, and I'm sure she'll recognize herself when she hears this. And we had this amazing conversation. She turned up at the last session of a retreat, and I literally, she almost kind of growled at me when I said, well, you know where you've got to go, which is inwards. And I would ask that these ideas that you have, including this video as well, examine them. And if something doesn't sit right with you, reject it. What you may find is a lot of your ideas about spirituality, when you are honest with yourself and you look at these ideas, are completely and utterly fantastical, and they're nonsensical in the truest sense of the word. So sit with them, put them down as and how you can. Put down this whole idea that awakening is for unique people. It's for those people who are sitting on a stage in front of 300-400 people. We are not lying to you when we say this is your very nature. Examine that. Self-inquire. Be almost, to quote the King and I, be scientific and actually look at these ideas. Self-inquiry is the basis of all scientific inquiry. It's the basis of knowledge. So inquire into the nature of your existence. It's all very well quoting the teacher, and it's all very well saying, but the teachers are saying this. But the most important thing is, what are you saying? Rumi, I think, says it best, and I'll end it there, which is, unfold your own legend.